Tyda.se som jag tror att många här har varit inne i och sökt efter lite ord någon gång. Har då 150 000 unika i veckan, 1,2 miljoner sidvisningar i veckan och 1,5 miljoner uppslagsbara ord i sitt system, vilket gör dem till Sveriges största online-lexikon. De har jobbat med Netric sedan 2008 och 80% av deras totala annonsutrymmen är faktiskt osålda. Därav då samarbetet med Netric. För att förklara lite närmare, på grund av att de har haft 80% osålt så har tredjepartsintäkter varit en väldigt viktig del. Sen juli 2012 så har vi jobbat med real-time bidding på Tyda.se. Och för att visa lite hur systemet funkar som ni ser här så optimeras då alla nätverk som är uppkopplade, egensålda kampanjer som kanske kan vara billiga CPM och CPC-priser plus RTB har konkurrerat på samma plattform. Och det vi har sett är att RTB har faktiskt varit den delen som har gett flest intäkter till Tyda. Det vi har sett är att sen juli 2012 så ökade Tyda.se's e-CPM, alltså effektiva CPM, på sitt osålda med hela 13% på grund av RTB. Det är alltså endast på 3 månader. Idag står 20% av Tydas intäkter på det osålda. 20% kommer från RTB, vilket motsvarar 8% av visningarna. En annan viktig del för Tyda i det här fallet har varit all den intelligence som man har fått ur systemen. Som ni ser här så är det här ett utdrag från Tydas interface i vårt system. Här finns det, ser alla den här röda? Ja. Här ska det finnas annonsörer, det har jag valt att ta bort inför det här forumet. Men man har total koll på exakt vilka annonsörer som budar på ditt inventory. Hur många bud de lägger, hur många visningar de vinner. Men den intressantaste delen är average bid CPM som visar hur mycket den annonsören är beredd att buda kontra hur mycket de vinner på. Och genom den här kunskapen så kan man som publicist då lägga price floors. Och vad är en price floor? Jo, det är att man lägger in så att man bestämmer att annonsör X får endast köpa för, de får köpa för mindre än till exempel CPM 10. På så sätt, genom att se annonsörers budmönster så kan man sätta olika regler. Sen finns det också ett steg om man vill gå in djupare i den här och det är den översta delen som ni ser här. Då kan man göra så att man går in på en annonsör som budar på ditt inventory. Kommer in i den här då för att se ännu djupare hur budar den här annonsören på andra publicister kontra mitt inventory. I det här fallet då Tyda.se. Den gula grafen visar hur annonsören budar på andra sajter och den blåa visar på Tyda. Och som ni kan se så är det mycket fler bud och mycket högre e-CPM på Tyda.se kontra annat inventory som är i vår plattform. Och vad ger det här för information? Jo, för det första så är det fruktansvärt transparent. Du som publicist har all kontroll. Dessutom kan du benchmarka ditt inventory mot andra. Men även få intelligence för ditt eget sälj. Vilka är intresserade av mitt inventory? Hur mycket är de beredda att betala? Och hur kan vi använda det här sen i premiumsyfte? Och på så sätt har vi sett runt om i Europa att publicister aktivt använder den här informationen för att prata med mediebyråer och annonsörer och börja göra private marketplaces som egentligen nästa steg som vi kommer börja se mer i Sverige. Vilket kommer bli framtidens årsavtal. Så, för att summera det, vad Tyda.se har tjänat på att jobba med RTB. Ökade intäkter, total transparens för dig som publicist samt intelligence till din säljavdelning. Och det är bara att ta tag i mig efteråt om ni vill veta mer om vårt system. Tack så mycket. Ja, den är där. Där.
How's that? Much better. Okay. So I thought I'd just add some context before I push through on the case study itself. I previously had the luxury of launching our ad exchange across Europe 18 months ago, and then here in the Nordics about 12 months ago. And what became apparent very early on was that this space, this RTB space, would be heavily dominated by the most savvy direct response advertisers. They would be the ones that would come and embrace this space very early. They were the ones that would come in numbers, and they would also benefit from that by getting a lot of learnings, a lot of data, and understanding about the ecosystem. Initially, what we saw when we launched was some relatively straightforward and simple retargeting, mostly for the purposes of driving conversions and sales, but also for optimizing campaigns in a much better way. Moving on from there, we saw much greater levels of sophisticated retargeting campaigns. To support one of Jonas's earlier slides that he showed, was that this type of buying behavior didn't represent at all an approach that would suggest that they were racing to the bottom on price. In fact, these types of advertisers were really seizing the opportunity to build better one-to-one communications with prospective customers. And so that's what we noticed very early on. Within a few months, we then started to see much greater levels of behavioral targeting being applied by the buyer side, and then data being layered as well, which was really quite interesting. And I think so from this evolution of relatively straightforward conversion-based buying to behavioral targeting, and then to being much more sophisticated with data, it validated one of the early predictions that I made internally within our company, that the buyer side would become very sophisticated very early on, and so sophisticated that there certainly was scope that RTB could play a role for brand advertising. And it's that and I should say before I move on there, is that whilst we haven't seen an explosion of brand advertising with RTB anywhere around the world just yet, it doesn't actually mean that there haven't been advertisers who have been channelizing RTB for the purpose of delivering on their brand goals. And so at Microsoft, we really believe that with the right buying tools and data, with the right publisher controls and transparency, with the right contextual environments, and really importantly too, with the right creative ad units as well, that RTB and brand advertising will heavily dominate the RTB ecosystem in the future. And so this next case study, which I'll spend a few minutes talking through, really starts to scratch at the surface of this belief that we have that the ecosystem is not just for direct response advertisers. And this case study is about Nissan. They were the advertiser. I'm sorry you can't see this. It feels like the presentation did do some funky things, as we spoke about before. But anyway, I'll try to read through this in a much better way. Nissan wanted to promote a brand new vehicle that they had on the market, and their target audience was really to reach people that were in the market for a new car. They had a very simple, and their primary goal was to ensure to drive as many people through who expressed this interest to a promotional site that they'd built for the car. The strategy that they adopted was to buy audiences that represented an interest in buying cars, but also a strong interest in autos and vehicles. And they kind of steered clear of the traditional approach of just buying bulk impressions on automotive websites. So that was their primary strategy. And in order to make that successful, they kind of identified two criteria for success. And the first one was around partnership and data. You can see that. As a brand-conscious advertiser, they really wanted to make sure they partnered with someone who could give them access to inventory and expose them to users without compromising on that safety that they held close to themselves. And so they partnered with Delta Projects. For those who don't know, Delta is one of the largest RTB buyers here in the Nordics, who have their own proprietary RTB technology, or an own DSP, if you want to call it that. And they also, interestingly, have their own profile and behavioural targeting attributions as well, which was really quite interesting for Nissan when they were looking at an RTB solution. And so for them, they partnered with Delta and decided to take full advantage of the technology, the expertise, and the data. The second criteria for success was really to ensure that they had the right they had access to the right environment, and that they wouldn't compromise on that safety that I spoke about before. So Delta Projects bought, not just on Microsoft inventory, they bought inventory from a number of local sites, not via RTB, but for RTB they partnered with the Microsoft Ad Exchange. And for those who don't know anything about our exchange, all of our MSN and Windows Live inventory flows through to the exchange, and we offer some degrees of transparency on that as well. And so Nissan really felt that by partnering with Delta and accessing our inventory, they would have exposure to premium audiences, but also importantly, they could appear, their ads would appear in an environment that they held, they thought was brand safe and was something they knew and they trusted. So how did it do? They achieved on their goals that they'd set out to drive a certain number of people through to their promotional website throughout the duration of the campaign. And I think it was just roughly over 20,000 unique visitations that they achieved from this campaign. And they did that from a much lower number of impressions than they typically would have had to buy previously. Interestingly, when they looked at the analysis of the campaign, the impressions that they bought via RTB on our exchange showed a 50% higher, on average, a 50% higher success rate of driving users through to the promotional website than what they received from the local sites. As a post-mortem to the case study, Nissan really felt that they could, by partnering with Delta, they could define their target audience extremely well.